and modify. Stop, drop it low, but pick it up carefully. Work them glutes like you in physical therapy.
Peritoneum. Let's talk about the peritoneum. Peritoneum is basically a thin serous membrane that lines the wall of the abdomen and the pelvic cavity and includes the viscera. Can be regarded as a balloon because it look like as a balloon against the organs which are passed from outside. The general arrangement of the peritoneum. Let's talk about the parietal peritoneum, visceral peritoneum, and the pelvic peritoneal cavity. The parietal peritoneum is basically the peritoneum which covers the line of the abdominal cavity. Visceral peritoneum, as the name suggests, covers the viscera, and the parietal peritoneum is actually the space between the visceral and the parietal peritoneum. As you can see here, this is actually the parietal peritoneum. This is the peritoneum which covers the viscera is the visceral peritoneum, and in between these two is the peritoneal cavity. So these are the examples of peritoneum. Okay, so now let's talk about the extraperitoneal organs. A layer of connective tissue called extraperitoneal tissue lies between the peritoneum and the fascial lining of the abdominal and the pelvic wall. In the areas of the kidneys, these tissue contain a larger amount of fat which support the kidney. As you can see here, this is the visceral peritoneum. This is the mesentery that attach the small intestine to the posterior abdominal wall, and these are the kidneys, and which is also called as the retroperitoneal organ. Okay, so the mnemonic for remembering the retroperitoneal organs are actually the Sedbecker. S for suprarenal gland, A for aorta, D for duodenum, P for pancreas, U for ureters, C for colons, K for kidneys, and E for esophagus, R for rectum. So parts of the peritoneum basically divided. Peritoneum is divided into main two parts. First one is the greater sac and the lesser sac. The greater sac is a main compartment and extends from the diaphragm down into the pelvis. The lesser sac is smaller and lying behind the stomach. The greater and the lesser sacs are in free communication with one another through an oral window, which is also called an opening and named as the epiploic foramen. So here you can see here the structure in blue is the lesser sac, and the structure all the way in brown and yellow color is actually the greater the greater sac. Okay, the this is the lesser the epiploic foramen. So as you can see here, so the peritoneal fluid is actually the fluid that is present in the peritoneal cavity, which in the peritoneum itself secrete a small amount of serous fluid which lubricate the surface of the peritoneum and allow free movements in between the viscera and the muscle layers. So the intra and the meso, the retroperitoneal organs. The intraperitoneal organs are refers to the structure which lie within the peritoneum, and the examples of these organs are the esophagus, stomach, duodenum, ileum, cecum, appendix, transverse, and the sigmoid colon. Okay, these organs are actually mobile, while the retroperitoneum or peritoneal organs are those organs that is attached to the posterior abdominal wall. It is non-mobile, and they are duodenum, pancreas, kidneys, ascending colon, and descending colon. Okay, again the mnemonic for the retroperitoneum organs are Sedbecker. Okay, these are the actual difference between the intra and retroperitoneum organ. Okay, now the mesoperitoneal organs are those organs which are partially covered. So they include the gallbladder, ascending colon, descending colon, middle rectum, and the urinary bladder. Peritoneal ligaments are the ligaments in the peritoneum are actually two-layered fold of the peritoneum that connects solid viscera to the abdominal wall. The peritoneal ligaments of the stomach. Peritoneum of the stomach include two main groups. Number one, ligaments which are attached to the lesser curvature, and the other one is the ligaments that are attached to the greater curvature. The ligaments of the lesser curvature yeah, are in, the lesser omentum, which are having the hepatoduodenal ligament, which is also called as HDL, and the second one is the greater curvature. The ligaments of the greater curvature are the gastrosplenic ligament, and the gastroomentum ligament. Peritoneal ligament of the liver include two main groups. The one that is the lesser omentum, connected with the lesser omentum are the gastrohepatic and the HDL, which is hepatoduodenal ligament. The other ligaments, which are suspensory ligaments, which is present on the liver itself, which connect liver to the anterior abdominal wall and connect liver to the diaphragm. So these ligaments include falciform ligament, coronary ligament, right triangular ligament, and left triangular ligament. As you can see here, this is the falciform ligament that connect diaphragm to the anterior abdominal wall. The falciform ligament move backward and it becomes the coronary ligament, and it when it moves posteriorly they become the left triangular and the right triangular ligament, and this is actually the bare area of the diaphragm, which is not connected, which doesn't which is not covered by the peritoneum. Now omentum or omentum are two-layer fold of peritoneum that connect the stomach to another viscous or viscerous. Greater omentum is actually the greater momentum connect greater curvature of the stomach to the transverse colon. It hangs downward like an apron in front of the coil of the small intestine and fold back on itself to attach on the transverse colon. While the lesser omentum or lesser omenta is suspend the lesser curvature of the stomach in proximal duodenum from fissure of the ligamentum venosum, okay, and porta hepatis. It separates the caudate lobe and process from the caudate lobe and meets the left sagittal fossa perpendicularly on the upper surface of the liver. The gastrophrenic omentum connects the stomach to the hilum of the spleen. Okay, as you can see here, this is the lesser omentum and this is the greater omentum. Greater omentum and okay, next we will discuss about the mesenteries. Mesenteries are the two-layer fold of the peritoneum connecting part of the intestine to the posterior abdominal wall. For example, mesenteries of the small intestine. While mesenteries of the large intestine and sigmoid colon, they are called as the mesocolons. The peritoneal ligament, omentum, and mesentery serve as a bridge that permit the blood, lymph vessels, and nerves to reach the viscera. Okay, as you can see here, this is the parietal peritoneum, and which when the parietal peritoneum, this is the visceral peritoneum. When the visceral peritoneum covers the intestine and it moves backward to connect with the posterior abdominal wall, so this is called as the mesentery. Okay, now we will discuss about the lesser sac. It lies behind the stomach, and lesser omentum extend upward as far as the diaphragm and downward between the layers of the greater omentum. The spleen, the gastrosplenic omentum, and the splenorenal ligament from the left margin to the of the sac. The right margin open into the greater sac through the opening of the lesser sac or epiploid foramen. Okay, so anteriorly it have free border of the lesser omentum, bile duct, the hepatic artery, and the portal vein. Posteriorly, it have the inferior vena cava, and superiorly, it have caudate process of the caudate lobe of the liver. While inferiorly, it have first part of the duodenum. Okay, now recesses are actually the small pocket-like pouch of the peritoneum. It is found in various regions like in the duodenum, the cecum, and sigmoid colon. Okay, they are called as the duodenal recess, cecal recess, intersigmoidal recess. So the duodenal recesses are actually superior duodenal recess, inferior duodenal recess, paraduodenal, and retroduodenal recess. While the cecal recesses are actually the fold of peritoneum close to the cecum produce three potential recesses called the superior ileocecal, inferior ileocecal, and cecal recess, while the intersigmoid is situated at the apex of inverted U-shaped root of the sigmoid colon. Mouth open or downward. Okay, next thing is the subphrenic space. The right and the left anterior subphrenic space lie between the diaphragm and the liver on each side of the falciform ligament. The right posterior subphrenic space lie between the right lobe of the liver and the left kidney and the right colic flexure. As you can see here, this superior duodenal recess, inferior duodenal recess, paraduodenal, and retroduodenal recess. Okay, so this is the recess that is found on the cecum area. This is the retrocecal recess. This is the superior iliocecal recess, and this is the inferior ileocecal recess. So the subphrenic space is, as we discussed earlier, the space that is found beneath the diaphragm, like here and here, as you can see here. This is called as the subphrenic space. As you can see here, this is the subphrenic space upside of the liver and beneath the diaphragm. Okay, here there are some other spaces that is called as the sub mesocolic spaces, like here, here, and here. Okay, the right extraperitoneal space lie between the layer of the coronary ligament and is therefore situated between the liver and the diaphragm. Paracolic gutter. So the paracolic gutters are actually the spaces that are found laterally to the colons and lie on the lateral and medial side of the ascending and descending colon. The subphrenic spaces and the paracolic gutters are clinically important because they may be the site of collection and movement of infected peritoneal fluid. As you can see here, this is the right paracolic gutter, this is the left paracolic gutter. These are the lateral gutters. Okay, so section of the peritoneum is basically divided for the sake of uh, easiness. It is divided into the upper above the transverse mesocolon, below the transverse mesocolon to the terminal line of the pelvis, and the lesser pelvic. So this is called as the upper section, middle section, and the lower section, as you can see here. So nerve supply of the peritoneum. So as we discussed earlier, the peritoneum have parietal peritoneum and the visceral peritoneum. The parietal peritoneum is actually sensitive to pain, temperature, touch, pressure, and which is supplied by the lower six thoracic and first lumbar vertebrae, lumbar nerves. Phrenic nerves supply the central part of the diaphragmatic peritoneum. Lower six thoracic nerve supply the peripheral diaphragmatic peritoneum, while obturator nerve supply the parietal peritoneum in the pelvis. So nerve supply of the visceral peritoneum, like visceral pleura, is sensitive only to the stretch and tearing and is not sensitive to pressure or temperature. The visceral afferent nerves that supply the viscera are the traveling in the mesenteric in the mesentery supplies it. Okay, over dissection of the viscous or viscera leads to sensation of pain. Mesenteries or small and large intestine are sensitive to mechanical stretchings. Function of the peritoneum fluid is actually it's secret of peritoneal fluid, which is a pale yellow color and somewhat viscid, contain leukocyte secreted by the peritoneum ensure that the mobile viscera glide easily on one another, which means as it acts as a lubricant. As a result of the movement of the diaphragm and the abdominal muscle together with the peristaltic movement of the intestinal tract, the peritoneum fluid is not static. Evidence shows that the entry of anything from down will quickly reach to the diaphragmatic peritoneum rapidly, and there is quickly absorbed and these are quickly absorbed into the subperitoneal lymphatic capillaries. This may explain due to the respiratory aid movement, suction aid movement into aid which aid the lymph flow into the lymph. So the peritoneal covering of the intestine tend to stick together, adhere in the presence of an infection, which is a good point for the humans. Thus, the greater momentum which kept constantly on the move by the peristalsis of the neighboring intestinal tract may adhere to other peritoneal surface around a focus of infection. In this manner, many interperitoneally nearly infection are sealed off and remain localized. The peritoneal fold play an important part of in suspending the various organs within the peritoneal cavity and serve as avenues for conveying the blood vessels, lymphatic, and nerves to these organs. Large amount of fat is stored in the mesenteries and
If it hurts to modify, stop, drop it low, but pick it up carefully. Work them glutes like you in physical therapy.